Ken Alex, who will be our speaker this morning, I think while he'd like to be the starting point guard for the Warriors in this week's playoff, his actual job is much more important. He's been leading the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, and there's a whole bunch of things that happen below the surface that just facilitate this transformation. And Ken, for those of you who've had the opportunity to work with him, you know he is absolutely dogged and focused and relentless, and he's somebody you always want on your team. I'd never want to be on the other side from him, I'll say it that way. So it's a great pleasure to be able to welcome Ken Alex. Thanks for being here.
What could be more important than starting guard for the Warriors? Wow, this is kind of weird. You people are very far down below. All right, good morning. Thank you very much for coming to my hometown so I don't have to travel to Sacramento today. I want to take the opportunity as the opening speaker to broaden this a little bit. You'll spend a lot of time on electrification and 100% renewable. But I want to give a little bit of a broader context. I guess we can call it beyond 100% renewable. The renewable piece, obviously, hugely important. But let me add some breadth to it and start at a little bit of a dour note, and then we'll go from there. You can't talk about climate without being a little bit dour. So this year, under the Paris Agreement, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, which is part of the United Nations effort, is producing a report on how we get to keep to 1.5 degrees. And that report will be out in October in front of the International Conference of the Parties in Poland in November, with the idea of helping to galvanize action. Some of that science, or most of that science, is already underway, and a lot of it is coming out, and you'll see between now and October there'll be various pieces that come out. Some of the science, so I just want to identify one piece just that I find quite sobering. So it's likely that by mid-century we'll lose the ice cover in the Arctic. And if that happens, because the ocean is much darker than the ice cover, and therefore retains more heat, it's comparable. Excuse me. It's comparable. The loss of that ice cover is comparable to adding a trillion tons of CO2 to the atmosphere, which is about half of what we think the carrying capacity we have left for 2 degrees. So that's a sobering thought, and so therefore our need to accelerate and to do more is going to be underscored this year as you see more of the specific science coming out. Having said that, now I want to talk about all the things that are happening and how we can continue to increase our ambition. So California continues with what I call our 6 pillars, and they will sound familiar. In the 2030 timeframe, we in California want to reduce, we're actually want to reduce oil in the transportation sector by 50%, double energy efficiency in buildings, get to 50% or beyond renewables in the electricity sector, turn our working and natural lands from sources of emissions to sinks. By the way, that is a huge issue, and I'll come back to that in a second. But a lot of the working on natural lands emissions are because of fires, and we have to figure out how to deal with that. We have a number of possible strategies, but that is a hugely important piece. It's relevant to renewables because their various transmission is at risk because of the fires, and we have to figure out how to integrate our electrical system given the threat of fire. And then the fifth pillar, short-lived climate pollutants, incredibly important, primarily methane, black carbon, and hydrofluorocarbons. I could spend quite a lot of time on that, but I probably won't. And then finally, the sixth pillar is we need to spend a lot more time, money, and energy on adaptation and resilience. We in California are required to integrate that into all of infrastructure spending, and it's also becoming part of requirements for things like general plans for local governments. But because of the science and our concerns about what's going on with the 1.5 degree challenge, there's now a seventh pillar, which can be called carbon capture or direct capture of carbon. And the good news is that there's a growing recognition that while it's no longer enough just to reduce emissions, that we have to sequester carbon in different ways. The good news is that there are multiple avenues for doing so, and that there's progress being made in quite a number of them. So, for example, UC Berkeley is leading a lot of the research on things like the impact of adding compost to rangeland, which turns out to have quite a significant ability to sequester carbon and water and improve growth in rangeland. And interestingly enough, that impact seems to, from a single compost addition to the land, has a 20-year lifespan, which is kind of amazing. There's a lot of work being done on a similar approach around biochar and adding that to soils. There's some work now, quite fascinating, on adding gypsum to agricultural soil. Gypsum takes up nitrogen, and so it actually reduces nitrogen in groundwater, nitrogen in NOx and air pollution, and nitrogen is also a greenhouse gas, and apparently a little bit of gypsum goes a long way. So pretty interesting development there. There are California companies, there are companies in Canada and Australia and elsewhere that are working on sequestration of CO2 directly in the cement and concrete production process. There's some work out of UCLA. There's a company in California called Blue Planet. The potential of sequestration in cement, for example, through aggregate is very, very substantial, and I think there's reason for optimism there. There's another California company that captures flue gas from oil and gas production and turns it into diesel fuel. That's economically viable today. I expect we'll see more from that. And there are, a number of other actions, including direct removal of carbon from the atmosphere. There's work being done at Arizona State and here at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, really promoting that. And there are a number of other technologies that have some pretty significant potential to be able to remove carbon and turn it into product. So I'm pretty optimistic about this, but it's as I say, I think it now has to be a seventh pillar that we think about. I mean, I'm sort of daunted by the challenge as we think about it, but I also am excited by the possibilities. And so as you attend the conference over the next couple of days, I hope you'll think about renewables in this larger context. And also about the issue of political will. So for me, the biggest issues in climate change are about political will and scale, because I think we know that there's technology that either exists or it's on its way that can deal with the set of problems that we face. But how do we integrate that into our economy and reduce our emissions by 40% over the next 12 years? That is the biggest set of challenges. And I want to give you one example here in California of the difficulty. So most of you probably know that the legislature last year passed SB 1, which is a way to fund transportation and improvement of our disintegrating road system in California. Included in SB 1 is a 12-cent tax on gasoline. And as a result of that 12-cent tax, there's very likely to be at least one initiative on the ballot to repeal that 12-cent tax on the very popular issue of taking action on our transportation system to improve it. So on one hand, the public very much supports improving transportation and repairing our highways. On the other hand, there's a very strong opposition to having a gas tax. And so there's a real chance that this initiative, if it's on the ballot, could be successful. If that's the case, that underscores the very substantial difficulty in making progress on what we all need to do for climate change. If you can't have a fairly modest tax to repair the roads and to improve transportation, what happens when we do the hard work that it's going to take that will in part potentially increase the cost of things like oil and gas. So I put this out here because in really the most progressive state on this set of issues, it's not easy. And so we need to be diligent, and our effort needs to be continuous. And I think there'll be a change in administration in California this year, or the end of next year, or beginning of next year. And so I think it's incredibly important that we continue the momentum and make sure that the political powers aligned against the actions that we have to take are pushed back and held at bay, and that we continue to make the progress that we've made. And while I have just a couple of minutes more, I want to talk to you about one other thing. You are probably aware that California is going to be hosting Global Climate Action Summit this year in California, September 12th to 14th. Many of you are already involved, but for those of you who aren't, I hope that you will join us. The idea of it is to bring together subnational governments, states, cities, businesses, civil society, investors, everybody who's doing significant work on the climate set of issues, to show the level of implementation already happening, the level of commitment that already exists and will be expanded, and to do so in front of, in UN speak, the stocktake that will take place in Poland in November, where the world will look to see what further actions they can take to keep global warming below 2 degrees and moving towards 1.5 degrees. We know that we have to do a lot more. And so the idea of the California Summit is to show all the things that are happening in California and around the world. And I hope that you will participate. I think that many of you are involved in the things that will be discussed and highlighted. We have to move to implementation. We have to do it quickly. We have to increase our ambition. And I think hugely it's important at this moment when the federal government has abdicated the field that places like California continue to lead and show the way. So lots to do, lots to think about, and I wish you a very good conference and continue the good work. Thank you very much.